Hi, my name is Tairone Bastien. I'm one of the curators for the 2022 Toronto Biennial of Art, titled What Water Knows, the Land Remembers. I co-curated this edition together with Candace Hopkins and Katie Lawson. We're standing right now in one of our main sites, 72 Perth Avenue. This building was a former church. This site specifically explores certain themes within the biennial, including notions of inheritance and what we inherit from our ancestors. When we think about relations, and we think about relations with our ancestors or with the place in which we live, there are those relations that we are given through blood, so family relations, but also those relations that we choose. And so it's interesting to look at and to consider the kinds of inheritances and relationships that the artists in this biennial choose to highlight and to celebrate and to question and to consider. So we're outside here of 72 Perth with the work of Ghazaleh Abarzamani. Ghazaleh is an Iranian artist based here and working here in Toronto, Canada. Ghazaleh's work is titled Forced to Float, and I'm standing actually right in the middle of it. It is a large cement enclosure filled with blue rubber mulch. This is the type of material that one would find in playgrounds. And the rubber mulch is designed as a material to slow the movement of specifically children and to also protect them from injury. And why Ghazaleh was interested in it is because it represents to her a material that speaks of the control systems that we surround ourselves with. So another aspect of Ghazaleh's work is always an interest in games and in play. But of course, with games and in play, there are always rules and restrictions. And so she's really fascinated by that interplay of freedom together with these restrictions. So another aspect of this material that Ghazaleh finds interesting is the fact that it is made from recycled tires. And recycled tires, or tires themselves, are no longer made out of rubber or pure rubber. They're actually made mostly of petrochemicals and toxic materials. And so for her, it's fascinating to think about these spaces that we create for our children that, again, sort of claim to be safe spaces for play, but in fact, behind them or underneath them are these layers of toxicity and these dangers that we, in many ways, accept as the norm. I'm standing here in front of a work by Paul Pfeiffer. This work called Incarnator was initially made while Paul was in residency in the Philippines at a place called the Bellas Artes Projects. While he was there, he became acquainted with a style of woodworking and a group of renowned woodworkers in the Philippines called Incarnadores. And the Incarnadores are sculptors who are able to work with wood and create these amazingly lifelike sculptures that one finds in churches across the Philippines. And in fact, the Incarnadores technique was inherited in the Philippines from the Spanish when they had come to colonize the Philippines in the 16th century. Paul was interested in this skilled technique because of the way in which the Incarnadores themselves are celebrated. One of the most famous Incarnadores sculptures in the Philippines is called the Santo Niño de Cebu, which is actually this image of the Christ child. Paul, whose work is often fascinated with celebrity culture and the kinds of power relations that exist within the media, saw within this the capacity to think about the media in a much more general sense. And so he enlisted the help of the Incarnadores to create a representation of the pop star Justin Bieber, whose figure you can see behind me, but represented as a Christ child or as a God king. To my left, what you also see is representations of the Incarnadores' own children. So these are busts of their children who are fans of Justin Bieber and who in accompanying video to this piece, we see singing along to Justin Bieber's music. And again, the third element that I think I want to highlight in this work are the representations of the camera and the light meter. And these are self-referential objects within the sculptural installation of Paul himself as the artist, and thinking about the ways in which artists, these sculptors, and other kinds of makers reproduce these images in terms of the spreading of belief. So I'm sitting here, behind me is Eduardo Navarro's Wind Oracle. This is a new commission that we were happy to co-produce together with the City of Toronto. It sits here on the lawn of Colborne Lodge, and so we are actually in the middle of High Park. The location itself was really important to Eduardo because we are sitting actually on a high hill overlooking Lake Ontario, and this is actually one of the highest points in the Humber River Valley watershed. Wind Oracle is a work that allows the viewer to commune with the wind. At the very top, you have a piece of fabric that will move in accordance with the direction of the wind. And you can see written onto the piece the words ask and yes and no. And so what Eduardo is inviting visitors to do is to ask the Wind Oracle a question and then to allow the wind to respond. The idea there is to create a kind of space where one is in dialogue with the more than human, which is one of the real underlying themes and ideas of the biennial, was this consideration of the world around us and the intelligences and the beings that surround us every day. We think about all of the ways in which that impacts us in our daily lives, but rarely do we think of being able to commune or to converse or to dialogue with the wind and with these elements. And hopefully this piece encourages that conversation. So I'm here at Mercer Union, one of the leading nonprofits in Toronto, and one of the partners that we worked with as part of the biennial. We collaborated very closely with Julia Paoli, the executive director here at Mercer Union, and myself on a project by Lawrence Abu Hamdan called the 45th Parallel. And this project is a new commission. It is centered around a space in southern Quebec called the Haskell Free Library and Opera House, which is a unique building that's situated right on the border between Canada and the US. And in fact, the border bisects or crosses right through it. So the 45th Parallel is concerned with the issue of the border and the ways in which borders both divide people, but also create these very anomalous spaces where the law becomes very abstract. This space of exception that is the Haskell Free Library and Opera House is the setting for a monologue about a murder at the southern border of the United States, in which a border agent from the US shot and killed a Mexican youth who was on the other side of the border. And what was fascinating for Lawrence to recognize was that in that the deliberations around that case, what we see is a kind of concern for what the prosecution of that murder would create, the ripple effects of that prosecution as we start to think about the consistent cross-border murder of civilians, of people using drones in other parts of the world. What was interesting about this installation, and I think what was interesting for Mercer Union as well, to think about a way of using this building, which itself was a former theater, in this way. And so it actually works really, really nicely in this space.